have time for a fruitful Q&A.
Great. Can everybody see what I've got over here at this point? Okay,
Yes.
cool. So so first of all, thank you so much for having me. I was joking with Sebastian earlier that I kept him up late one night because he went and presented at one of my classes, and he woke me up early, and I think he actually got the better of the deal. 6 o'clock hit really hard this morning, but I'm really, really excited to be here. I think this is a fun topic to talk about. It's basically my life's work. And so of course, I used the Lego that was constructed for me. Of course, I didn't shave. This is the book. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But today it's all about data-driven campaigns. And so I've got a relatively short deck. I just wanted to go through and give you sort of an overview of some of the things that Sebastian wanted me to cover, and also a few other things I think would be super interesting for this group. First, a little bit of an introduction. And then we're going to do like what's now. These are the two others that I put together, and we'll explain why I'm so all decked out right there. And then what's next? And so, yeah, the introductions would be like, who am I, and like, where do I come from a strategic standpoint? What's now is if you look at AI and how it's constructed with research, it's sort of like we have this technology glopped onto us at this point. We're walking out with suits of armor. And then what's next, I think, is we end up with agents and things that we work with. And so that's why next to me I have its own Lego, and I'm kind of looking at him a little bit askance, going, "Hey, you taking my job, or do I get to hold the briefcase? Do you get to hold the briefcase?" I have some interesting points of view on that, but he looks like he's heavily armed. And so he's not only ready for, positive campaigning, he's also ready for negative campaigning. We'll talk about that in a bit. But firstly, I mean, why would you want to listen to me? I about 20 years ago started Cohen Research Group, which is a strategic research company that works with political candidates and big organizations and companies. But I also started off the Gallup poll. It was the first job that I had when they were essentially like the lead group in the United States for polling, and that was a fantastic experience. And from there, worked for under the tutelage of Tony Fabrizio, who runs Donald Trump's campaign. He actually, as a side note, invited me to that campaign. It was the only campaign I've ever turned down. I wouldn't work for Trump, and the rest is history. I feel pretty good about it. I mean, it may be the only invitation I get to work on a presidential campaign, but particularly right now with all the crazy that's going on, I just wanted everybody to know where I am. And then so I started Congress in Your Pocket as a web app for the first iPhone. I legitimately still have a first iPhone. Let me get that for you guys. Um, See, it's real. I swear to God, I still have the first one. And so when the iPhone came out, I said, "Wow, this would be a really interesting project for me." And so I had studied the Congress, our legislature, at the master's and PhD level, and I was like, you know what? It's really hard to get this information. I should really try that out. And I put up a web app, and then our server crashed the next morning, and I was like, "Oh shit, what happened?" And what happened was that Apple featured it on their front page. And so like we got a ridiculous amount of traffic, and I was like, "Oh wow, we have a business here." And so we did that. We did some in states. But what's interesting to you guys is we actually work with Dodds UK, which is one of the big information services. We do the British Parliament, and we also do the EU Parliament for them. And so we actually work with them internationally. From our side, basically they brand on top of our technology. And then the other two things I do that are particularly interesting, maybe to some of you, is that I teach digital political strategy at Johns Hopkins University here in Washington. I also teach a domestic and international campaigns course at NYU, which Sebastian joined me at graciously at night. And of course, there's this book. But for me, like all of this kind of like leads to that. So when you look at the book and you look at the kinds of things that I've done with my career, it all kind of flows through to that. But my book really isn't about that. It's more about the nuts and bolts and the kinds of things that you all are covering in this group. And I think it's a really neat fit and a really cool opportunity for me to come and talk to you guys. So making polling useful. My point of view on this is that you should start strategic and then go tactical. There are other groups that really want you to focus on the nuts and bolts of how to go and get voters and how to reach voters. But from my perspective, you should start with that. So when I talk about research with clients, my first question to them is, what will actually drive the strategy? Because too often what happens is that in surveys, when we get them, people are saying, well, I'd really like to know this, I'd like to know that. And before you know it, your 10-minute survey is like a half an hour. And in our fast moving world right now, people don't have time to do a half an hour survey with you. So you really have to be very careful about what you're asking. So the key question that I ask my clients all the time is, what are you going to do with it? So in other words, if you find out the answer to this and it's different than what your expectations are, will you do something different? And if you're not prepared to do something different, well, then forget the question. So from my perspective, when you're working with a campaign or where you're working with a private client or you're working with a corporation, you have to understand not only what are the interesting questions to ask, but really how much the client is invested in that question. And so you have to spend the time in the front end, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but to understand what we're trying to accomplish. The other thing is that when you plan your tactics, you need to combine polling with other sources. When I first started out in my career, polling was sort of determinative. It was the only data that we really had, was public opinion polling, and so you'd only get it, every few weeks, and then maybe at the end of a campaign you would get more of it. But right now, you have a lot more information at the ready, right? You have financial information, you have organizational, you have levels of online engagement. So you need to sort of put polling in its place and circle around it all of the other data points you have to see if that sort of fits, right? And so from my perspective, you should really be doing these three things when you're making polling useful by itself. And polling, in my point of view right now, is that it's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not the tool. And again, when I started out in the late 90s in the United States, I had a candidate whose name was Nancy Argenziano in Florida. And she was, and some of you may remember this because you might have read the book, but this is a great story because it was my first brush with mortality. My candidate was kind of a badass, and she was really tough. And there was an ad that all of a sudden started showing up on radio, of all things. And it was to the theme of the Addams family. Now we should probably put this in the links because no one's going to remember this because I'm too old and you guys are too young. But it would go, her name is Helen Spivey. She's raising all your taxes, less money for your family. She's Helen Spivey. Da 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 da. And it would go on and on and on. And so my candidate was really upset because she was getting blowback from supporters. And she calls me and she goes, "You got to get rid of this. If you don't, I'm going to kill you." And I said, "Oh, that's really bad." She's like 6'4", big, big, strong woman. And I'm like 5'6", and it's not going to happen. I'm in big trouble, right? I call the party. And then I say to them, "Help me here. First of all, I don't want to die. And number two, I think that the ad's funny and it's going to work." They did some polling. It came back, and I got the campaign manager on the phone because the candidate was no longer talking to me. And she said, and he said, "Okay, fine, I'll put her on." And I told her that the polling was working and that we're not going to pull the ad. It was from the party, it was not from her. And I said, "If you just hold on, we're going to win." And she ultimately did win. And then I got her on the phone on election day, and she goes, "Okay, I don't have to kill you now. Do you want to come work for me?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm just happy to get out of this alive." So, for me, like in that moment, like polling was the thing that saved my life, right? And it also was the big reason why campaigns like didn't go off the rails. But now it's no longer the final tool. We have a lot of different kinds of information flowing in. And so make sure that the polling fits with everything else you're listening to. There are sort of common mistakes. And I think the biggest common mistake when using strategic research is that you overinterpret. Polling has a lot of types of error. Okay. Polling is not just the margin of error that's reported in newspapers or online or anywhere else. It's not just plus or minus 3.5% or 3%, in a larger poll, or 2%. What I worry about the most is non-response error. And this is from my experience here in the United States, where we got, as an industry, we got the Trump call wrong in 2016. And the problem was is that people were being interviewed who looked like the people who were voting for Trump, but there weren't enough of them. And not only that, they were also avoiding polling because the candidate himself was bad mouthing polling. So there was a big difference between someone who was a middle-aged white male um, factory worker who was in our sample versus the same kind of person who was not in the sample, and they just had different opinions, and they had different opinions enough that it mattered in the polling. So we need to be careful on this. You need to ask yourself, based upon what I know about this race and what I'm seeing elsewhere, does this even make sense? So, for example, during that campaign, I had a former student of mine who was in Ohio, which is like sort of the heartland of the United States. And he was knocking on doors with teams, sort of trying to get the word out about Hillary Clinton at that point. And what he was finding was that the door knocks were supposed to be like 80-20, like Democrat to Republican. As he was knocking on doors, it was 75-25 the other way. And so what he was seeing on the ground wasn't matching up with the polling and wasn't matching up with what was going on. They sent that information back to Brooklyn in New York, where the main team was. And they said, "Oh, you're new, you're a kid, just trust me, keep going." And so what they ended up doing was turning out a whole bunch of Republicans instead of turning out a whole bunch of Democrats. So you need to you need to understand like what you're looking at your polling. Are you seeing this on the ground? And then don't overinterpret groups with small sample sizes. This is a big bug that I think a lot of people really need to get through their skulls, is that if you have a survey of a national survey that's less than 1,000 likely voters and maybe 800 in states and provinces, you probably don't have enough people to make it a call. And then on top of that, if you're looking at smaller groups like 100 or 200, and you're using that as like a way to like make a big decision, be very careful because there's a lot of margins of error within that. And so if you're looking at maybe a national poll, which is like 1,000, it's like 3.1%. At 800, you're looking at like it's like 4%. So if you're looking at like 100 or 200, you're looking at like 8-9%. And if you're in a contentious race, you're not going to be able to make a call from there. So be very, very careful and humble about the data that you're collecting. So the other thing too is pull to field long surveys. Like make sure that you don't put in the field longer surveys because the fact of the matter is that people are dropping out of them. The other thing I would ask you to learn from the United States, and this is from my personal experience as a pollster and also talking with other folks, slow down. Okay. There's a big, big push for speed right now. It's even in the subtitle of my book. Um, but the point is that speed kills. It kills good decision making. It kills all the way through from the time you're taking to write to fielding your surveys and to reviewing the findings before making decisions. And I'll give you 3 examples. On the drafting side, socialize the drafts before among the key leaders of the campaign. Don't just say, okay, we don't have time. This is just got to go. You have to slow down because the mistakes you make on the front end trail all the way through to the back end before they hit the field. In operations, I advocate for staying in the field longer. Usually the standard right now is 2 to 3 days in the field. I advocate for 4 to 5 because you want to capture the gig workers. And frankly, if you can, capture some people who work weekdays versus working over the weekend. And so from my perspective, you need to do that because not only that, some people will, when they get texted to web to do surveys, which is how a lot of surveys are done right now because it's the best way to get people, they start the survey, but they don't finish it until a day or two later. So it's really important not to just go, 2 to 3 days because you're going to be missing a lot of people and then you end up in non-response error land. And then last year, Ann Seltzer, who is the preeminent statewide pollster, so it's like a province wherever you guys are, she didn't check her crosstabs and there was an obvious red flag. So she had actually Kamala Harris winning her state in Iowa, which by the way was crazy because like that state was not going to go to anyone but Trump. And instead of looking at the crosstabs and realizing that the spread among men was so extraordinary that Harris was intended to win men in Iowa, very conservative Iowa. She missed that. And because of that, she let the poll go and it was printed that basically that Seltzer is predicting that Harris is going to win Iowa, and that was a big, big moment at the end of the campaign. She was off by like 10 points. And so sometimes when you look, yeah, it was bad. Like it wasn't even within the margin of survey error. There was something fundamentally wrong with that poll. And the thing is that when you're rushing to get something out because you have to do it, you need to take a step back and realize, okay, what do I know about the race? What do I know about this state? What do I know about the underlying politics here? And then if I get something, hey, it could just be flat out wrong. And so that's what happened here because she decided to go too fast. And this happened to the best statewide pollster in probably my entire career. Okay. This is the person who's the benchmark where all pollsters are doing, statewide polling. And she got caught. So let's talk about what's now. Let's talk about the all the stuff that's now on my shoulders over here. And I look kind of badass. I even have like the eye patch. I've been through the wars, but I have all this mechanics on me. So we are cyborgs. That's what it is. And when you are operating right now in politics, we are essentially cyborgs. We have computer assisted strategy. We begin with what we know, the rules, the previous elections, the political environment, and all these kinds of things to help structure our thinking. But then we add the knowledge that we now have the access to that we didn't have before the newest wave of generative AI. We have access to information on our candidates, on our opponents and voters, and this helps us inform our message. But we need to remember that campaigns are grounded in humanity, not technology. This is really important. Don't forget, like this is a human business. This may be the most human business that exists right now, which is, when you're working in politics, you're not just working with technology, you're working with people. So I advocate for that. And remember that voters themselves are not robots yet. So, until we can delegate someone to go out and vote for us on election day, I'm going to hold on to the idea that our voters are not robots, that we could just, if we give them 2 or 3 more of this input, we get that output. People are extremely complicated, and I think we need to sort of ground ourselves in that. So on the messaging side, when you look at this, we are now in a situation where, at least in the United States, AI is being used as a drafting tool by the best and the brightest. And so what I mean by this is that for decades, we would focus on large groups of predictable voters because those teams and tools were limited and they were really expensive. But now only the best funded campaigns could afford the messaging consultants like us, and production teams and ad inventories. But now generative AI is helping us to draft messages, audio and video content, and it extends the reach to individuals. So instead of just looking just at groups, we now have basically a helper on our campaigns to be able to reach more people because we could do more things. But with that comes a responsibility. Everyone can afford these tools. This is the first time in human history where there's been a major advance in technology, and we have all had the opportunity to use it at the same time. That also means that we're all making mistakes at the same time. What usually happens is that in a big jump forward in politics and in technology, what happens is that the top campaigns can only afford the technology. So for the first political cycle, maybe the second and the third, all of those tools get refined over time. And then by the time that we get them for like lower level races, they're now cheaper, right? But instead, this time, everyone can afford it from the jump. So everyone's using it at the same time, and everyone's experimenting, and everyone's making, progress and also mistakes. On the testing side, I began my research career in the 1990s at Gallup, where we did traditional, qualitative and quantitative message testing. And I'm sure you've done this before when you listen to Rachel's teams, and you've gotten a really good education on that. And I do teach some of that, of course, at the college level. But post COVID, message testing has been completely supercharged by solid video connections. Like if you think about it, before COVID, the best you could do is get lucky that FaceTime is going to work, right? And now, what? There's a couple dozen of us here, and then even more are going to watch this afterwards. And we can actually do this kind of interviewing all over the place with more voters at once. So what this means is that when you do traditional qualitative testing, you can now, instead of bringing everybody into a room and do focus groups, you can do these remotely. And you do them with many more people, and you could have them interact and do really interesting kinds of work, on behalf of your clients and stuff like that. And it's a really major step forward. And now generative AI tools allow researchers to quickly summarize main points from qualitative interviews and pull insights from large data sets. That's where I'm finding that this has been used really widely. So for example, at the end of the Zoom, we're going to have, I'm sure, a summary that we're all going to get, and it's going to summarize basically the main points of our discussion, which is amazing, right? But if you think about doing a focus group with, let's say, 20 people instead of 5 to 7, and then you get all of that richness summarized, that gives you a leg up on understanding like what happened in that group. And also you can get that information back to clients very quickly. The other thing too is that when you have a large data set, let's say it's a survey data set, and you have all the demographics down on one side, and you have all of the questions across the spreadsheet on the top. Sometimes because we're human, we have our own biases and perceptions on what we think is going to be really interesting in that survey. And so what we do is we focus completely on those things, right? We look at it, we're like, okay, first of all, who's going to win? Did the messaging work, right? But there might be something else in there that's actually really interesting. And what I'm finding is that the AI assisting tools do find nuggets of insight in the data that we wouldn't, because we're looking at it from our perception, which is really very, very interesting. So today we can test more messages smarter and faster than we could before, which is really great. So let's talk about like what's next, and after that we'll wrap it up and we'll do some questions. And as you can see, my guy is heavily armed and he has a drone next to him, which should make sure that we understand who's the boss in this kind of situation. And so the strategy where we're going with this, we may end up in a situation where we're not drafting this, AI is drafting it. And this is a concern that I have, because I've been talking a lot with different technology companies in the United States, and they seem to understand or believe that they can go ahead and put together campaign plans that are AI driven. So in other words, let's say I live in the state of Virginia in the United States. I live in the 10th congressional district. And let's say I'm going to run for Congress, which is a terrible idea right now, but I'm going to run for Congress anyway. And so I don't have any money because I haven't really thought this through, because running for Congress is a terrible thing at this point. And I say to my campaign consultants, get me a campaign plan. Okay, Mike, how much money do you have? I have nothing. Okay, cool. We're just going to have the AI do it for you. And so you end up getting this kind of bland, non-interesting, plan, but it's better than nothing, right? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the point is that if you end up in a situation like, let's say, 1 or 2 cycles from now, where you start seeing down ballot races have very bland, straightforward, non-interesting campaign plans, chances are some of them are going to be AI drafted. Political technology firms are developing these kinds of shortcuts to strategic planning with generative artificial intelligence. And that, to me, is actually where I'm most concerned about where this is going. This is, again, taking out the humanity of campaigns and going to an algorithmic kind of campaign. The tools identify what we know, the rules, previous elections, the environment, parties, candidates, and groups to draft a plan. And they give smaller campaigns a head start, and then consultants and candidates can build out a full strategy. Or will they? Like, that's the question that I have. Or will they, right? I mean, for example, when I saw my Lego, I was like, oh, that's awesome. I'm absolutely going to use that for my for my presentation. But then I went ahead and I constructed 2 other ones because I thought it was an interesting way of doing this presentation. But again, I didn't draw them. Like, I didn't go to somebody. Like, I just asked ChatGPT to pull this out for me. In this case, like, I actually wonder whether or not some consultants will just take the shortcut and go with it. So in this case, we start with the technology, then add our humanity, which is flipping the script on this. And that's the big concern I have about this. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to this group, because I think that this is the concern I have where we're going. My point of view on the bottom line of this is that AI requires adult supervision. And so, like when you have kids and, you can't just like let them play outside anymore, because they'll do all kinds of crazy things and they'll run off and stuff like that. Growing up when I was a kid, we were free range kids. You come home when the lights go on, and, when dinner happens and stuff like that. But like now, everything we do is super structured. Well, in this case, AI needs to be super structured, because what's happening is we're either losing interesting points on the campaign planning, interesting points on research, and then on top of all of that, remember, this is a human-based business. The other thing that we're finding too is that AI is going to be involved in the posting of content. And one of the key components of message is voter delivery. And for decades, those choices were made by humans, and now they're being made by algorithmic suggestions. So if I wanted to go ahead and I want to, you know, advertise about a candidate on Meta, it'll tell me like who my market will be. Like I can give them, a group of people who I know support me, and they will find other people who are essentially the same. And then we're finding others platforms with convergent TV and streaming, where you just sort of set it and then the algorithm will tell you where it needs to go and when, as opposed to people making those, important choices on where the money's going. Cross-platform decisions are increasingly diverse and complex, which actually makes it really hard to make those decisions as a human being, which will lead to artificial intelligence tools delivering these messages for us. So it'll be choosing the time and the place and the channel on where this is all going to go, and that's, again, we're letting more and more of the humanity out of the campaign situation. In the near future, media planners will decide which voters see your strategic messaging, and it won't be a person. So that's what I'm really concerned about. On the optimization side, traditional computer-assisted and AI testing by campaigns are going to be replaced by AI optimization without our intervention. And that's where the guy on the right basically grabs my briefcase and goes ahead to go do this stuff. A recent study indicates that AI testing is within 85% of what would be found by testing with voters at the top level. Okay. Now it breaks down when you look at specific demographics, but this is where the ball essentially is going. If we could test messages faster and cheaper with AI, what decisions will be made without us? And again, one more time, adult supervision is necessary. So where we started with human-based strategy that was expensive and inefficient, but it was authentic and it was important. But what's now is that we make smarter decisions faster with technology. And where we're going, how much of your campaign strategy will you delegate? And that really is the question that we all have to grapple with, because we're the first group of consultants and the first generation of consultants that is using these tools. And we need to give it limits, not only on what we're going to allow it to do, what it should do, but also what it shouldn't do. And I feel like that's a really big piece of this. So let's connect. So I'm on LinkedIn. There's my email address. There's a telephone number. You can always get to me. There's a book and all that kind of stuff. But I'd really just love to hear from you and answer any questions you have about any of this stuff. But once again, I think that we're in a really transformative time. And there's a lot to be really excited about. There's a lot of efficiencies we're going to get out of our campaigns. There's a lot of things that we need to really keep in mind about how much we want to delegate to AI on these kinds of questions. And I hope I've given you guys a little bit to think about. So with that, I will set up, and we can go with questions from that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Let's open it up for questions. Feel free. We're a small group, so feel free to raise the hand, and I'll give you the floor. Okay. So we have Janice right away.
And I'll share the deck too, so you guys will have it.
That would actually is a common request, so that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Janice.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
I just wrote down 4 quick points in 15 seconds that come to my mind that are in the form of a question mostly. But
Sure.
For me, from what you presented, some reflections are, is AI helping to adapt the questions on the spot based on what someone is responding? So is this part of how AI is integrated in polling methods? So that's one that I'm not aware.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, whether with AI we can have a way of having the system picking up the voice or the tone of the voice when someone responds, so that then the tool can adapt better. And then for countries like Greece, for instance, where we're not as technology savvy as some other countries in the Nordics or the US, I'm just wondering what are the risks that perhaps can come in terms of excluding key populations, such as people that are in rural areas or older populations that are key in terms of voting. And last, I'm just wondering, how can corporates learn basically from what we do in polling for political strategies to adapt it for lobbying campaigns? Yeah, some questions and reflections. And thank you so much.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think they're actually really important. I guess if I've got the first one correct, just repeat. We'll repeat them individually, and I'll answer them individually. Why don't you go to the first one?
The first one was more from a practical perspective, whether AI is able to adapt basically to how the questions are asked in a polling, so that based on what someone
someone
answers,
asks you get a different version. Yeah. I mean, as we all know, I mean, with polling right now, and it's been that way for the past 30 years. I mean, if you answer a certain question, then you get another branch of another, question and stuff like that. So like, that's just basic survey construction. I don't know that we really need AI for that, to be honest. I mean, what we could do is decide on the AI side, if you answer, let's say there are 30 questions and you answer the first 5 a certain way, then you get another version of it. I think it's almost too cute by half at this point. I mean, I know it is legitimately possible, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of utility to it. I mean, one of the things you're trying to do with quantitative research is to make sure that you give everybody essentially the same kinds of stimulus so that you can wrap it up into a bow and understand what's going on systemically. So if you then break out people by different branches, well, then you have to have a huge survey, right? Because you have to have enough people in each one of those different paths to be able to compare. And so I would advocate to probably not use it in that situation. We probably can do it. I just don't think it's advisable. What's the second one?
The second one was in terms of analyzing the tone of voice or hesitation.
Yeah.
Because I just did actually a focus group exercise now for some of the things that I'm doing. And it's something that I felt was missing a bit. And if I was the one to judge, it will be subjective. So I wonder whether that's part of how the technological aspects can improve how polling is done.
Yeah, no, I think number one, it would be great for polling, but it would be terrific for qualitative. Okay. And so right now, we don't really have that because the modeling of our voice and our inflection and our body movements. I mean, sometimes there are different cultural differences. Okay, that they're very I mean, if I come at you like this, you might find it's like very aggressive. Americans would be like, "Oh, that's funny," but you know what I mean. I mean, there are things that are very different on how to score, a specific intonation of a voice. And I think that is something that's developing, but would ultimately be very useful, particularly when you have these recorded sessions and you would, for example, let's say you get a summary of what happened. Well, this person enthusiastically said this, as opposed to this was just said. Like, so at this point, I don't think we have that, but I think it would be interesting, you know, piece of research that I think that the research industry would probably love to have, to be honest. And you have 2 more, to be honest.
Yeah, not to take more of the time of the rest, but
no, it's good. No, they're good questions.
To put them together, the first one was in terms of how, as we're advancing in this modern type of political campaigns using technology, whether we are excluding certain parts of the population that are not as tech savvy, i.e., rural areas or more older populations that could be scared perhaps to answer, and they will be not as comfortable. And the last one was some reflection in terms of how corporates could use some of these learnings for their own campaigns.
Yeah, so Giannis, I mean, my point of view on the third one was, yes, I am very concerned. And that is what I talk about in non-response error, I was talking about earlier, which is, who are we getting? Are we just getting really online old people? Or are we getting, and are those people the same as the people who are not really online? And my suspicion is the answer is no, based upon what I've seen in the United States. And so I'm actually very, very concerned about non-response error. And I think there are a few ways around it, by the way. Number one, we're going to have to start incentivizing some people to do these surveys. So you can't just like, for example, when I was doing survey research in the 90s, hi, I'm from the Gallup poll. Oh, awesome. Wow, the Gallup poll is calling me. Now it's like, Gallup, go away, you know? And so, okay, fine, here's $10. All right, I'll do the survey, you know? And so I think at some point we're gonna have to incentivize people who are dropping out of our surveys in some way, shape, or form. And well, the fact of the matter is, I mean, we used to get all that information for free and we're gonna have to pay for it. And I think that that's fair. I actually do. I think that's fine. I mean, we're asking people to give us 15, 20, a half an hour of their time. They deserve to get paid for it. And so to a real extent, we're going to have to start doing that to make sure that we are getting those people who are falling through the cracks. It's really important. The last thing I would say, Giannis, is a great question, and I've sort of built my career around this. Um, a lot of the work that we do in politics really does translate extremely well to the corporate sectors. And the reason why, number one, a lot of the nuts and bolts that we do are the same kinds of things that you would do in corporate communications or in corporate research or whatever. And even in grassroots organizing right now, like I'm finding that a lot of those things are very portable too. And so from my perspective, it's a great place to do it. The one thing I would find also over my career is that corporations move much, much slower than campaigns, much slower. Like you might work on a project for a couple of things that you're going to turn around for a candidate in a couple of weeks. You'll get months. And not only that, but they pay on time, which is really nice. A lot of political candidates, frankly, do not pay on time. And then after the campaign's over, you're trying to find the money. They're trying to find the money. But look, corporations, and also big NGOs and other organizations, they're in the public affairs sphere. It does port very nicely, and they really appreciate how fast we can move to do what they do. And what usually happens is, what I find, Giannis, is that we spend a lot of time waiting for them. But good questions, really good questions. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, you bet. Thanks for coming.
It is clear that Giannis is onto something.
Yeah, no, definitely.
That's great. Anyone else? I think Giovanni, you and Eduardo, you had your cameras on. So
Yeah, anybody? Yeah, I don't mind. I'll stay. I'm not on the clock. I cleared my morning for this, Sebastian.
yeah, okay. Would you like to go next? One of you, Giovanni, Eduardo, Asia?
Yes, thanks. Just I'm using AI in my daily work, and I noticed
Sure.
that
We all are.
based on the prompt, sometimes it can absorb your biases and it
Yeah.
tend to cheat. So I was wondering how you deal with this in data analysis, or in the fact, or when you have to analyze a large database and you're using AI. How do you prevent that your biases are absorbed by the AI, or are like taken from someone else, somewhere else? Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question. I think it's a struggle. I mean, I think we always struggle against our own biases. I know that when I get my research back, like I come at it with a specific point of view, and what I think I'm going to find. And sometimes, you're right. Sometimes you're wrong. And I think you have to start from a place where you are willing to be wrong. Okay. And I think that a lot of us who are in politics, a lot of us who are in research, we have very strong opinions. That's why we're involved in politics, right? And we have very strong opinions on what we think we see. And that's comes from expertise, right? And so you have to essentially do the thing that Yoda has tried to teach us in the original Star Wars, which was unlearn what you have learned, and you have to be willing to be wrong. And not only that, but it's important to be willing to be wrong, because you will miss things like Trump 2016. The standard wisdom was that this guy could never win, especially after Access Hollywood and other scandals, and that this was going to be just a total disaster. But that was just a failure to understand what was actually going on. And so I think you have to come at it from that perspective. From the AI perspective, I use AI when I'm doing data analysis to fill in gaps in my own biases. So when I ask the AI, hey, what else is interesting in this data set? I'm not trying to tell it, hey, can you find me an answer to this or that? I'm just trying to say what else is interesting, that is statistically significant in an interesting direction. I mean, and then you get something, and it may not be interesting, right? It may be something that I've already seen, Or it might be something that's wrong because you have to make sure that it's not hallucinating, right? I mean, I would never say to a client, hey, ChatGPT just chug this thing out. What do you think? Like, I'm going to end up looking at it from every which way that I can to understand what I'm looking at because I don't trust the thing, right? I mean, don't forget the guy has like a drone, and missiles on his fingers, right? I don't know that I trust the dude, right? So at this point, my point of view is that you have to be very skeptical about your own biases, and you also have to be very skeptical about what you're getting back from AI, because number one, the current models apparently are 2x more likely to give you hallucinations, which is frightening. Okay, and if they're admitting that, who knows what else is under the hood? I went to a thing over here at Hopkins about a couple months ago where Mira Murati, who is the head of it briefly while Sam Altman was fired and then he was rehired, and she was asked a question by Kara Swisher. So how do you know how they're coming to the answers? And her answer was very scary. In a very placid, nonplussed kind of way, she looked at it and she said, "We actually don't know." And I'm sorry, but if you can't show your work, and tell me like how you got to a certain conclusion, I'm going to use this for a campaign, or I'm going to use this like for a corporate client. Hell no. Like I'm going to make sure that I have this thing buttoned up. I mean, before I go to anywhere with it. And I think that that's really upon us. This is the adult supervision part that I'm talking about here. Good question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Giovanni, would you like to or Rachel or Asia, like feel free. We have some time.
Yeah, if I may,
Yeah, I got time.
I think that previous answers actually tackled this issue. My curiosity was about, the AI scare in a sense, because we are users, but we also have another layer of users, which are the ones that interact with our works. So in this case, not the ones that do the polls themselves, but the one that compiles them. So the AI scare is double, but from us, because we fear that it might, as said before, it might be biased, it might confirm some errors that we ourselves made. But also, is there a true problem, let's say, in the general public about being worried about AI uses, like a product that has been done with AI or that as AI influences gets automatically, they may be more scared to interact with a product that has been produced or co-produced with AI rather than a genuinely human product?
I think it's a fair question. And again, we're getting a whole bunch of incoming on this, particularly from last year in the United States. Both major parties used AI in the very beginning of those campaigns at the presidential level. And so the Republican National Committee put out an ad that had a fake Biden and a fake Kamala Harris in the ad. And it got a lot of blowback right away. And so people really reacted viscerally to it negatively. And Democrats actually did use this in a different way also. And it also got very negative. So I think that, I think the tools aren't so good right now where you can't tell the difference between one or the other. And so when the tools get better and we can't know right away from first watch whether or not this is real or whether or not this is AI generated, I feel like that's going to be the major problem. So like, when we pass this sort of political Turing test, where we can't tell what's real and what's not, that's where I'm actually super concerned. Because right now, if you start looking at some of these pictures, they have like 5 or 6 fingers, they have 7 or 8 fingers on a hand. You can't, if you look over here, it would say modern political campaigns, it would have like all kinds of like gobbledygook on the book. And so like the output of this is getting better, but it's not indistinguishable between the two. And so voters right now basically have said, this is not what we want, right? There's also been some academic studies that I've seen where they test labeling that this ad was made with AI, which is actually what the American Association of Political Consultants says it wants to happen, right? Well, once you do that, it also boomerangs. What it says to the viewer is that this was made with AI, you can't trust it. And so trust levels go down when you see an ad like that. So suffice to say, like all of this is basically pushing all of this AI stuff off your screen and in the back office to where we're drafting, to where we're coming up with different ideas, to maybe where we're testing. So for example, from a research standpoint, where you would spend a lot of production time coming up with different ads and things like that that you would want to test in an environment that's either online or in person with research. Now you can do multiple different versions of it, right? And then you can do all those tested, and it's much cheaper. But again, you have to, in a testing environment, people will look at that, and you have to be very careful at saying like these are draft, ads, or this is draft content. What do you think? And so I think from a research standpoint, it's actually become really helpful, in drafting content to be tested. But when it goes and faces voters, it needs to be without the AI at this point because it's indistinguishable. And also, to be honest with you, I have a visceral problem with the idea of like putting up stuff that's AI, even if you're labeling it, because I mean, again, we're in the people business here. And as soon as you tell them that it's being done by a robot, it really rubs people the wrong way for all the right reasons. Good question. Good group.
All right, Asia, yeah, you go.
Asia, cool.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious, honestly, about your thoughts on the future of technology and how going to be implemented in politics, like from I guess it's like two-way question. One is from the expertise and polling perspective. I'm curious about the use of the synthetic data and as basically reaching voters is getting harder and harder nowadays, and the traditional incentives might not be working anymore because of the attention economy we live in, and with that we got to compete with all these multi-million corporations who control the voter attention, but also the technology. I'm not sure how whether you've seen implementation of synthetic data, for instance, in polling as some of the new tools that are being explored in the political campaigning field in the States. And second question is on a little bit more, I guess, on augmented reality and the use of AI generated content, maybe even AI generated AI candidates, whether you think and see that politicians might be using their AI crafted personas to communicate to voters more locally, or to establish more direct links with voter base, although it's not going to be them, but it's going to be their proxies artificially generated. So curious if you have thoughts about that.
On the second one, I hope I age out before that happens. Yeah, I really do. I really hope that that I end up in a situation where I'm not really alive when that happens. If we have AI agents and AI candidates, that's frightening. I have seen, and to be serious, I have seen situations where politicians have done stunts, like a candidate didn't want to debate somebody, so one candidate who's a real candidate debated an AI, which was funny and also embarrassing for the other candidate. And I think that's snarky. That's the kind of snarky I'm into. But if you're telling me that we're going to have candidates that are AI generated essentially, well, that's really frightening. I mean, I really hope we don't find that.
Yes.
But from the
Sorry.
but from
Sorry,
Yeah.
what was the stunt that you mentioned? I'm curious to read a little bit more about that.
Sorry?
What was the stunt you mentioned? The example of someone using AI to represent themselves. Yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
curious to read.
the stunt was is that a newspaper was holding a debate, and there was a real candidate who wanted to debate, and there was a real candidate that didn't want to debate. So the real candidate showed up, and they put an AI chatbot trained on the other candidate to debate the live person. Okay, and it was crazy. I mean, and I think Sebastian's sharing it in the chat. Yeah, there it is. And so there's other things like that. And so from my perspective, when you look at this, it was a stunt, right? I mean, it was basically embarrassing the other candidate for not debating. And so he said, okay, if you're not going to debate, well, then we're going to have an AI be for these 2 hours. and we're going to go and do a debate this way. So it's crazy, right? It's just, but I think that we are far enough away where I don't think we have to worry about that yet. But I think, you know, as you can see, there's like sort of an inching towards releasing some of the responsibility to algorithms and to, you know, AI generated content. And that's really the concern that I have, that, you know, right now when we are seeing like AI generated content for campaigns and for corporations and stuff like that, again, it's usually in draft mode. So you're not seeing like stuff that's just basically generated and posted, right? It goes generated, human, posted, right? And so as soon as you pull the human out of that, that's what you're talking about, Anya. I mean, that's the worst kind of scenario. Now, what I'll say is this: is that going to the first question, if I got this right, if not, feel free to correct me. But on the data-driven campaign side, a lot of these kinds of decisions that I was talking about in the sort of the middle part of the deck, where you know, where we're going to place the advertising, when they're going to be placed, and also with who, because with whom, is also another way that the algorithms are going to help us from a data-driven standpoint. So these decisions used to be made by humans. You know, when I first started, it'd be like, oh no, you don't want to advertise on CNN because, you know, your voters hate CNN, or, you know, your friends love you know, football, so we're going to do football. But now those are much more tailored to smaller and smaller groups. And so as you get to smaller and smaller groups, it's much more difficult for humans to make really intelligent choices with budgets. And so when you're getting down to the granular level, as you know, let's say we want to get to the people who live on my block, on my street, right? Well, what are their, you know, preferences and stuff like that? People don't know that intuitively. We're going to need data for that. And so that's the point that I'm trying to make here, is that there are going to be some good decisions being made, much more efficient decisions with your budgets than we're able to do now. And I think that is a positive thing.
All right. I didn't want to cut because it was really, really interesting. Probably the most interesting one so far. And but I also am conscious of time, and that this the format of this is 1 hour lunch for you is breakfast, to learn something new, meet people, and then of course continue the conversation. So I encourage everyone to reach out to Michael and to
Please,
continue.
yeah.
He's very available, I would say, to have this type of chat. So feel free to do reach out. Thank you so much, Michael, for starting the day with us. And to Giovanni, Eduardo, Yanis, like make sure that you, like Rachel said, go and check the online course on data-driven campaigns. Quite honestly, all put together, you could watch, you know, all the videos in about, I would say, a couple of hours. There are like some quizzes and other tools to make sure that you are absorbing the knowledge, and it's gonna remain available at least for a few more days. So I really encourage you to do that, and then all you know that you are also invited to a final masterclass and networking session in Brussels on May the 14th. So I'll make sure that you have all the information, but you know, this is not the end. We will still, for those based in Brussels, we will have a chance to grab a drink and see each other, because that's also the fun part of this experience. Thank you
I
so
gotta
much.
get to Brussels. That's great.
Yeah, I know. Now
That's
you wish
awesome.
you wanna be here. Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do, for many reasons. Thank you so much,
All
everybody.
right.
Thanks for the
Thank you so
invitation,
much.
Sebastian.
Have a great
Take care,
Friday.
everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
Friday.
Bye.